And here we are, we're live. It is Thursday night. That means it's time for AMA, Ask Me Anything. My name is Pete Baker. We're with Alta Vista Assembly in beautiful bucolic East Bakersfield, California. And we're going to be with you for the next 30 minutes and answer good questions that have been sent in or will be sent in. I'm joined tonight, as always, by Matthew, the producer moderator, who's pushing buttons and scowling, which is never...
I'm not scowling. That's my
That's
regular,
never a good sign.
No scowl intended. Everything's golden.
Anyway, in your usual perky, cheery way, I want you to greet the people and tell them how we play the game.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a good night.
Do you really?
We'd really like to discuss, is this
no.
a cup or is this a vase?
A vase.
A vase. Tomato? No? Is that what was supposed to be in there?
Well, there's Kool-Aid in there
Yeah,
now.
Kool-Aid, not iced tea.
A child's drink.
But anyway, the way it works is you submit your questions. Like if you were to ask what's in Pastor Pete's drink, we would ask that live, you know? And then we have
In the
questions.
comments
Yeah, in the
section.
comments. And then we have some that are submitted.
You're ad-libbing so much you're not getting to the point.
That's how it works. It works
Okay.
the same way it worked last week. Or no,
I'll
we didn't
this.
do it.
You can just submit your questions in the comments section and we'll take those first.
Okay, everybody ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's see here. What is a good way to share the gospel with our Mormon friends?
I would say no different than you would share the message of good. The word gospel means good news, message of good. Then you would share it with most anybody. Firstly, I would say don't make your friend a project. I think a lot of times that's done. There are different evangelism methods and how-tos that kind of turn the other person into a project. They're not your project, all right? The best way to share the message of good, what Jesus has done for you, is just naturally, easily. It doesn't have to be a set-up deal. You don't have to buttonhole them or come up with all kind of clever icebreakers and all that kind of stuff. So don't make them a project first. And share your story. It's a really important part of the Mormon method. When Mormons are taught how to share their faith, a real integral part of what they do is they want to be able to tell you their testimony. They have a testimony of Jesus Christ. And if they can share that, that's a goal. And they believe that there's a certain amount of it's a good thing to be able to do, and a certain amount of God's power then infuses that interaction if they can get their testimony in. So I would assume then that they place such emphasis on testimony that testimony is important to them. And so tell them your story. Tell them of how you met Jesus. Tell them, you know, I'm not perfect. I'm not what I'm going to be someday, but I'm not what I used to be. And the difference was made by embracing Jesus Christ, becoming his follower. To the best of your ability, tell that story and tell it honestly, and be transparent about your story, because they place value on testimony. So your testimony would be valuable to them, I would think. I'm assuming your Mormon friend is a person of goodwill and that you're a person of goodwill. So don't make them a project. Tell them your story. Listen to their story. But here's a tip, and it's probably not particular to Mormons, but I think it would be especially helpful. In the Mormon system, they don't have a great deal of what we think of as grace. Grace is the unearned favor of God. There is much in Mormonism that is accomplished by doing things, by performing your mission, and just a number of other things that go into being a faithful Mormon. I won't say there's a lot of works involved, but there is a lot of work to it. And grace is not as prominent as it could be. So what I'm saying is, talk about the grace of God, the unearned favor of God. That this thing is not based on my performance, it's based on the performance of Jesus, and he performed very well. And so talk a lot about the grace of God. What I wouldn't do is cross swords with them about different distinctive doctrines of theirs, partly because you won't be as well informed as they are, and your rebuttals may sound kind of tinny anyway and canned, and that's not the important thing anyway. Talk about your testimony, what Jesus has done for you, how you've been transformed, how Jesus living in you, living his life in you, has been a transformative experience. And talk about the grace of God, the unearned favor of God. Again, not my performance, his performance, and he's performed very well. So in just a nutshell, that would be my best counsel. But that's kind of what I would advise you do with anybody.
What is Christian existentialism, and is there any validity to it?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Somebody's digging deep there, and that's a good one. And it's a relevant one. Let me just talk about existentialism. It is a philosophy. It is a largely 20th century philosophy, although it's spilled into the 21st now. Existentialism began in the early 1900s, probably among German thinkers, but it quickly went to French thinkers. And what we think of as existentialism today is really more the French variety. The German variety is more technical, more explanation to it, more commentary, wordier, harder to wade through, and the French existentialism a little more sexy, and that's what's really caught on. Anyway, it's basically, it began as a rejection of the idea coming out of the 1800s, early 1900s, that human beings collectively, human beings corporately, you should have a lot of confidence in what human beings can do together, okay? Thanks to World War I, that idea was literally exploded. And there was a lot of disillusionment, and existentialism partly came out of that. It's a rejection of the idea that the earlier confidence that people had in what human beings could do corporately, okay? So it emphasizes the individual. And it is the idea that we want to retain the personal, and that you become a flourishing human being best by the things you experience, by your existence, your human existence, yourself. And again, because it's a rejection of the corporate idea, the all of us in this together thing, it tends to be individualistic, but the idea is you want to retain the personal. That's very important. The existentialists felt, and they were reacting against the idea that we're losing ourselves in this corporate image. And so they're rebelling against that, whether that was in communism or in industrialism or just a whole lot of other things. We were losing our humanness. And so let's get back to that, and you get back to that by, through the things you experience, that helps you to be a fully flourishing human being and fully realized and actualized and all of that. So the existentialist is concerned more with the acting person than they would be with the thinking person. So it is a different kind of philosophy that way. But if you go along far enough, and some of the principal existentialists are people like Sartre and Camus, Heidegger, these people were great thinkers and great intellects. They were sometimes original thinkers in some ways, but they tended to live horrible lives. Heidegger was a Nazi. He was a Jew hater. He proudly wore the Nazi pin on his lapel to get himself through. So on a personal level, they were sometimes reprehensible people. And their idea of, concentrating on the individual and retaining the person, the acting person more than the thinking person, what it could lead to, and very often did lead to, even by their admission, was the alienated person, the isolated person. It finally led to things like absurdity and the theater of the absurd and that kind of stuff. It can end, and very often does end, existentialism in nihilism, which is, hey, at the base, there ain't nothing. There's nothing worth living for. Life is a joke. That's kind of where it leads. And so it's pretty dark, actually, when you get to the end of it. Now, the question is not about that, but that's the background. The basic idea that we don't have a lot of faith in the corporate, and so we've got to emphasize the personal, and it's the acting person. That carries over into what's called Christian existentialism. Now, I think of Christian existentialism like I think of Christian humanism, that it is the result of a neglect on the part of Christian people, Christian institutions, churches have neglected humanism, the idea that humans are important, and so along come these Christian humanists, and they name it, they label it. It's part of God's plan all along, but it's been downplayed or ignored by Christians, by the church. And so along come people who give it a label, and they emphasize it, and they promote it. And so you get people like Erasmus and Thomas More and in the Reformation era that were Christian humanists. They were thoroughgoing Christians, but they emphasized humanism, the idea that humans are important. I think of Christian existentialism the same way. It's not anything that is necessarily, now this is Christian existentialism, that is foreign to the gospel or foreign to the plan of God or what God is doing in the world. It's the result that there has been less of an appreciation of what God is doing with human beings, with individual human beings, that to be a fully flourishing human being, you need to act out of that and act out of who you are. You are an imager of God and all of that. And so a lot of times things can result, there can be movements, there can be philosophies, there can be emphases like this, and we say, oh, it's a new thing. Well, not really. It's come to attention and it's gotten labeled because it's the result of a neglect. I'll give you more concrete examples. If you neglect mystery in our faith, and our faith is full of mysteries. Paul talks a lot about, I'll show you a mystery. And the church went through a time where it eliminated all the mysteries, it answered all the questions, it had all the doctrines nailed down, and there were no questions to be asked. It can answer everything, and there was no mystery. Well, you eliminate mystery, you starve mystery out of the thing, and you get things like LDS, the Mormonism, which is rife with mystery. Joseph Smith, he rightly looked across the churches in his area, called the burned over area, because they had tried every kind of Christianity known to man, and they had figured everything out, and it was all locked down. It was a dry, dead affair. And he said, what about the mystery? And so he comes up with what we call LDS, which is full of mystery. You eliminate the idea that God heals people, divine healing, and you say it doesn't happen for today. It's no longer around. God doesn't operate that today. You do that long enough and you get things like Christian Science, which is all about healing, but using the mind to do healing. And there's errors in that system. You downplay the emphasis that Jesus is going to return, the end times, prophetic emphasis, and you get things like Jehovah's Witness. What I'm saying is that the errors, and I'm not saying Christian existentialism is an error, but it is an emphasis. And these things come to light. You get these things because they have been downplayed by the church. They've been ignored by the church. So Christian existentialism probably has its genesis in a fellow by the name of Kierkegaard, who was an odd Christian, an offbeat Christian for sure, but he was a Christian. He was a lover of Jesus. He's the guy who introduced the whole idea of angst, this malaise that we live in, this angst that we have. He's the one who introduced that. They called him the melancholy Dane. He was Danish for that reason. He kind of downplayed the sadder side of things. But he's probably the father of Christian existentialism. There are others, Karl Jaspers, others. But and the idea among them is that the individual is important. They would even say maybe the individual replaces community and the corporate. So it's an emphasis on the individual. That's what Christian existentialism is. And that you become a fully functioning human being by acting, by getting involved, not just by sitting around thinking, giving mental assent. And so, yeah, there's a lot of good to it. I'm sure there are Christian existentialists that go too far, but that understanding of it, it's the result of something that's been neglected. So it's a little bit of a course correction.
Who or what is Metatron? Not Mellotron.
Not Mellotron.
Not
That was
melatonin.
Mellotron was a
Megatron.
clunky early 60s synthesizer. It was a crazy thing. You hooked up all these 8-track tapes to a keyboard. It was crazy. But anyway, our word is Metatron. What is it? Well, it's a who, not a what. It is a character that shows up in some Jewish mystical writings. We don't have time to go into it, but Kabbalah type writings, which is not mainstream Judaism. It's offshoot of Judaism that emphasizes all kinds of secret knowledge, secret numbers, patterns, all kinds of things. You can even do some fortune telling with it, certain kinds of it. It gets pretty harem-scarum. There's a book of it called Zohar. It's a Jewish mystical text that talks about this character. He's called the king of angels in some places. In other places, he's an incarnation of Enoch. It's pretty loosey-goosey. The name has been kind of seized on lately, and you can find all kind of almost comic book depictions of him as this muscled-out angel figure. He's not in the Bible. He's not part of mainstream Judaism. He is in Jewish texts, apocryphal texts, that were never by anybody, by the rabbis, ever considered authoritative. There is a mention or two of him in the Talmud, but not in an endorsing kind of way.
What's the Talmud?
The Talmud is a huge body of literature. It's discussions that took place over several hundred years and were reduced to writing eventually, beginning in about the 300s to about the 800s or 900s. It was compiled. It's discussions about fine points of doctrine, about how to live. It's inside baseball stuff in Judaism. Some of it's very, very entertaining. Some of it's dry as sticks, but he's mentioned in there. It's Jewish discussions, disputations. And the Talmud is unique among any it's a multi-volume thing, is unique among religious documents in that not only is the winning argument recorded, but the losing arguments are recorded too. It's a lot of disputation, back and forth stuff. And some of it can be fascinating stuff. Anyway, he gets a couple mentions in there, but not in an authoritative or an endorsing kind of way. Again, not in the Bible, but it's a character that shows up in Jewish mysticism. And now in the last, 30 or 40 years, authors have kind of picked up on it and made him a character in some of I'm thinking of a Thomas Pynchon novel where this guy goes into an insane asylum to visit a dominatrix, and he is confronted by a howling guy that says he is Metatron. He is this angelic being, this king of angels. George Santayana, the guitarist, he claims that I think since the mid-90s he's talked with Metatron every day. So you get these fringy kind of references to it now. Not anything that you want to really pursue a whole lot. This character shows up in Judaism because in Judaism and in Christianity there is this strain. There is this kind of weird tension among some Christians and some Jews to forget that God is in charge, that God is monotheistic, we have one God, and they kind of view this dualistic idea that evil is just as strong as good, that the forces of darkness are just as strong as the forces of light, and the devil is as strong as God. And you get this crazy dualism, and this Metatron figure, he figures into that kind of thinking. So it's not mainstream, not in the Bible, in fringe literature. picked up in some popular culture now. So you'll see pictures and depictions now. He showed up as a character in different series and movies and that kind of stuff. But
What does the Bible say about hell?
a little bit, but not the same as what pop culture and popular thought, even popular religious thought, says about hell. I mentioned dualism just now, the idea that good and evil are equal, God and devil equals in some sense. A lot of the ideas that people have about hell, even Christian people have about hell, are really not biblical, but they're dualistic ideas. Since you got a great heaven, you've got to have this horrible hell. A lot of the imagery that people popularly associate with hell doesn't really come from the Bible or from Christian tradition, but it comes from Zoroastrianism, which has a huge emphasis on fire, and it is a dualistic religion where there is evil and there is good, and there is this tension that is a standoff, a stalemate, and it's eternal. That doesn't describe anything that the Bible describes. God is always and ever in charge. But so a lot of the popular thinking, even among Christian people, they've absorbed from culture, and they've absorbed from Zoroastrianism, and they've absorbed from Greek mythology, and they've absorbed from Dante, and they've absorbed from Milton, and the images that they use. They've gotten from wild-eyed preachers that are badly informed. There are preachers that love to preach about hell and damnation, and they can paint quite a picture. I remember years ago there was a fairly famous church evangelist that preached on the hell-bound train, and he went into lots of detail, but it wasn't biblical. So what I'm saying is, what does the Bible say about hell? It does have things to say, but it's not the same as what people typically think of, okay? The idea of hell in the Bible, it originates with the Hebrew idea of Sheol, which is the idea of a pit or a place in the earth, or the grave. It's just simply the grave. It's a place of inactivity, and the Hebrew scriptures talk about it. The Hebrew scriptures don't talk a lot about the afterlife, but they do mention a place called Sheol, which is simply the grave or the pit, okay? Layered on top of that is a Greek concept of Hades, which is a place, an afterlife place, where the spirits are still conscious, but they're a pale image of their former self. They lack a lot of vitality. It's not a place of torment necessarily, but it's not a place of thriving either. In the Greek system, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, they have chapters that talk about people going into Hades, and it's described that way. It also borrows from another Greek concept, Tartarus, which is a place of some punishment for those that have behaved wickedly. Jesus talked about a place that he borrowed imagery when he talked about people who reject God and what their life is going to be like because they have rejected God. He borrows imagery from a place called the Valley of Hinnom, and the Greek word for that is Gehenna. The Valley of Hinnom is a place outside of Jerusalem, outside the Temple Mount, where they had over time turned it into a city dump, and they would dump the garbage there, they would dump combustibles there, they would dump the bodies of criminals, unclaimed bodies of criminals there. It was a putrefying place, it was a nasty place. The fires there that had begun almost never, they burned incessantly. It was a smoldering place because it was always being fed with more junk and trash and combustibles. And Jesus borrows that place, Gehenna, to describe what eternity is going to be like for those who reject God. If you don't want anything to do with God, then you're going to wind up in a place, you're going to get your wish. But it is a place, he said, where the fire does not go out. It's also a place of eternal darkness. So there you've got that contradiction. People seize on that and they say it's literal language, there's literal flames there, but how can you have a literal flame when it's dark, when it's completely dark? Jesus was speaking in metaphor, and he borrowed that awful place where the worm doesn't die and the fire doesn't go out. Not to say you're going to be covered with maggots and worms or you're going to be roasted. He was borrowing it to say it's a place you don't want to go. Now, the way it's described in the New Testament is it's a place where God's not willing that you would go. He's made every provision that you could avoid it. And it is a place without the presence of God. That's what makes it hell. That's what makes it bad. Not the flames, not the architecture, not the maggots. What makes it hell is God is not there. But the reason you're there is you didn't want to have anything to do with God. And so it's a result of your own choice. You wanted to live a life where you say, I don't need God. All right, then you're living a life of your own choosing. God doesn't send anybody to hell. People choose to go there themselves, okay? But I balance that against several repeated places in the New Testament that indicate God is not willing that anybody go there. God is not willing that anybody perish, be eternally separated from him. So the question is, who gets their wish? Do I, the rebellious person who says, I want to live without God, I'm going to live without God in this life, and so you get to live without God in the next life? Do I get my wish, or does God get his wish? He's not willing that any should perish. And I think there's some room for discussion there. The question is, some raise the question of how long does hell endure? What does the word forever mean when it's applied to hell in the New Testament text? Well, that's a semantic, that's a language question. And I'm not sure that anybody has really worked it out to my satisfaction. Again, the popular ideas are that it's a place of flames, it's a place of maggots, it's a place of torment, it's a place of torture by the demons. What we know is that it was never designed for humans. It was a place that was designed for those fallen beings, divine beings that rebelled totally against God. And that's about all we know. The issues that surround how long, those are technical issues. Those are language issues. And I think there's still some discussion to be made. A lot of people seem to think they know all the answers. I'm not sure I do. For those that are interested, I'll give you two differing books that are very readable and they're very thoughtful, and they come at it from two different angles. One is by Rob Bell. Bell wrote this before he kind of became kind of a Oprah-ish type guru. He's kind of out there now, but he was a very able Bible teacher, and he had some questions about hell and how long it lasts, and so he comes at it from one perspective. It's called Love Still Wins by Rob Bell. And then Francis Chan wrote a very thoughtful response to Rob Bell's book, Love Still Wins, called Erasing Hell. And so they come at it from two different ways. And if you're interested and you want to delve into it, I would recommend both those. Love Still Wins and Erasing Hell. And they deal with it much more thoroughly than we could. I have a lot of questions about how long it lasts, actually. But I am sure
You're
that...
not going to ask me, or...
No. And I've not satisfied myself with those questions. That's one of the reasons I don't preach on hell, because I have a number of questions about it. And I've never preached on hell, and I probably won't. But, and I'm not afraid of the concept. The Bible does talk about it, but it talks about it to the degree that I've just shared the certainties that the Bible seems to indicate. There are a lot of questions about it. There are a lot of people who seem to know certainties around it, but I would submit that they draw a lot of their imagery not from the Bible itself, which were metaphorical images, not to be literal images, and they draw a lot of their information from Dante and Milton and movies and loud preachers.
Okay, last question for tonight. Is disbelief or non-belief in God a sin? And I kind of think this goes with the previous question.
A little bit. Short answer, no. If you're talking about disbelief, or non-belief, I don't believe, or I have questions about, no, those are not sin. If a person, to my thinking, if a person remains curious, and they remain honest, I believe that their disbelief, or what they might even call non-belief, I believe that if you remain curious and you remain honest, that you will eventually find your way to belief. I really do believe that. So the short answer is no. Stay curious, stay honest, and I believe that curiosity and that honesty will point you in the direction of the living God, and of which is reality. God is reality, and if you're curious and you're honest, you'll find that reality. Because we were meant to live rightly related to God. We've been stamped with the image of God, the Imago Dei, and that is indelible in us, and that will draw us to our true home. I believe that. And we were meant to live in right relationship to God. Pascal, the mathematician, philosopher, Christian thinker, people have described him as a mind on fire for Christ, and he had this to say. He said, inside every human, there is a God-shaped vacuum. I think that's true. There's a place in us that can only be filled by God. And so again, if we remain curious and we remain honest, I think that will draw us and help us to find the right thing to fill that God-shaped vacuum. Now, we can resist all that. We can insist that it's not true. We can deny our own nature, that God-shaped vacuum. We can try and fill it with other things. We can mock it. We can deride it. We can act like it's not there. If you do that, you'll be untrue to yourself, because again, we're stamped with the image of God. And you can deny that, but you'll be untrue to who you really are. And I think that can set in motion in a person who takes that approach. I won't be curious and I won't be honest. It can set in motion a series of difficulties and all kind of mental gymnastics that result in what the Bible does talk about, and it is a problem, called unbelief. And unbelief is really where you choose a rival over God. Rather than choose the living God, rather than choose to fill your life, that God-shaped vacuum, with Him, you fill it with something else. You make a conscious choice of another guiding principle in your life, of another God, okay? Now, it could be, Old Testament Baal or something like that, or Moloch, or it could be a drive for success, or self-awareness, or self-pleasure, or you could have a whole range of gods. But when you choose a rival God, that is unbelief, and that is a serious problem. And you're going to get yourself in all kind of trouble with that. It will lead you in the exact opposite direction, which you could suppose, because it's a denial of who you really are, that God-shaped vacuum, the image of God. And when you deny who you really are as a human, and you deny the fact that we're to be rightly related to God, well, you could understand you're going to have trouble. So, disbelief, non-belief, a sin? No. Unbelief, a conscious choice? Yes. So remain, if you call yourself an unbeliever or a disbeliever, you have trouble believing, remain curious, remain honest, and I believe that will lead you to the living God.
Right. We just had one sent in. Anonymously, so we're gonna make this our last one.
Okay.
I want to squeeze it in here. Do blessings or illness come from how much faith we have?
Say that again.
Do blessings or illness come from how much faith we have?
How much or how little faith we have?
Yeah.
Not always, and not necessarily. Things are a little more nuanced than that, a little more complex than that. There's a whole lot more going on than that. Now, can you do things in your life that bring bad consequences? Obviously. There are habits, there are things you can indulge in, there are ways of thought, there are destructive things you can clearly get involved in, and you will have consequences, and you'll reap the whirlwind for that. Conversely, there are things that you can do that will bring, goodness into your life, or good things into your life. But it is not correct to look at somebody and label them as blessed however you would imagine a person to be blessed. You see somebody who has all their bills paid, and they eat at the best restaurants and they drive a really nice car. It would be wrong to look at them and say, oh, they are being blessed by God. Some of that may be, but not necessarily. Conversely, it would be wrong to look at anybody who was in an unfortunate circumstance or had a sickness or whatever and say, oh, well, they don't have enough faith, that's why. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. God is working on so many levels, and there's so much going on in our life, and there are cycles in our life, and there are times where we make good decisions and bad decisions, and then you have exogenous circumstances that you had nothing to do with that come to bear on you, and there are international circumstances and all kinds of things that have no connection to your behavior or lack of, or faith or lack of. To say that it's a quid pro quo, if I'm doing well, it's because I have faith. If I'm doing poorly, it's because I have lousy faith. Not necessarily. Many people of great faith go through great trials of long standing and long duration. It does not mean they do not have faith. The word faith means allegiance. I have an allegiance to Jesus Christ based on his allegiance that he's demonstrated to me. And because of his allegiance to me, I have allegiance to him. It's a reciprocal relationship, a true relationship. And faith means allegiance. It's not a hoping, it's not a wishing, it's not a generating some kind of force to get things done. It's allegiance to Jesus Christ, and I will not back up on that. You can maintain that allegiance to Jesus Christ when you're having a very tough time, or a very tough year, or a very tough 5 years. You can still have allegiance, faith in Jesus Christ that is incredibly strong. And I would submit that some people have a stronger faith when they go through difficulty than they do when they are on easy street. In fact, affluence and easy street can sometimes run counter purposes to our faith, because we don't learn anything by our successes, we learn everything by our failures. And when everything's going well, we can get the idea that I deserve it, we can get the idea that I did it, and we can lose sight of God. Harder to lose sight of God as a person of faith when you're going through difficulty, because your dependence on him every moment, every hour is strong. So no, there is not necessarily a correlation there.
All right, that's all we have time for.
There we go. Well, then that's all we'll do. We are with Alta Vista Assembly in Bakersfield, California. And this Sunday, 10 o'clock, is our English service. And we're talking about revival on these Sundays, so come and check it out. If you want to look ahead, we're in Acts chapter 9, talking about the man who shook the world and how he got started and how he still influences us today. Anyway, that's Sunday, 10 o'clock English, 2 o'clock is Spanish, 7 o'clock is Spanish as well. And so you could join us for any of those. If you are in our neighborhood, you're in our vicinity on Sunday, and you don't have a good home church, you'd be most welcome. 10 o'clock English and 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock Spanish, as I said. Well, listen, we always drop our Sunday morning service at 2 o'clock and 2:15 on Sunday afternoon. We do not live stream, but we drop it 2 o'clock and 2:15.
Mm-hmm. We did not this last, but we're going to, yes.
Yeah, we didn't last week. We
Technical.
had a little snafu with the modem or some such thing. Anyway, that's all patched up. So we'll be back in business Sunday.
2 and 2:15.
Okay. And you can find that on our Facebook page.
Facebook, YouTube,
Alta
next day on our website.
There we go. So you can check us out there. You can come and see us in person. Either way,